Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome officially to the Global Skills Visa webinar. As I mentioned, my name is Ilya Brodsky. I'm the CEO and founder of VanHack, and we have a lot of information to cover today for you. Today, I'm very excited to be joined here as well with Brian from the Vancouver Economic Commission, as well as Craig and Neil from Ernst & Young, who will be going over both why Vancouver is such a great place to work and live, and how the visa actually works itself. And then with VanHack, what we do is we find the best tech talent around the world that is looking to relocate to Vancouver and help companies identify and hire great talent. So we'll go into more detail about that later. And as I mentioned before, there'll be a lot of room for Q&A. But if you have a question, please ask. It's much better to have questions come up and have more of a conversation. We don't have so many people here with us, so so it'd be much better to just kind of have a chat, a conversation, rather than just one or two people speaking. So don't be shy. Okay, great. So without further ado, Brian, I believe the floor is yours. If you could please join us and give us a little bit more information about Vancouver.
Can everyone see full screen now?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. I have a love-hate relationship with technology. So we just told you about signing up at vancouvereconomic.com/lens. How do I move these forward? Just slow, I guess.
Yep, it worked.
So we're in the, we are the Economic Commission for the City of Vancouver. We do all kinds of things to support the technology businesses. So we just wanted to let you know a little bit about our services. It's pretty comprehensive, and we cover the markets, helping companies like yours access new markets around the world, especially in Northern Asia and up and down the West Coast. Access to capital, investment capital, helping, of course, with talent, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we also work on the local technology ecosystem here in terms of promoting Vancouver as a destination for business, for capital, and for talent, and attracting foreign direct investment from those global companies that we all know and love. So welcome to Vancouver. We have a booming technology sector, as many of you know, and we're claiming all sorts of awards, including the #1 startup ecosystem in Canada. But also, it's well known that we have an amazing visual effects and digital media hub. We're also the top clean tech cluster in Canada. In fact, we own now more than 30% of that industry is right here in Greater Vancouver. So the technology sector is doing really well, and of course that's creating all kinds of challenges for those in the recruiting business and the HR managers. So you can see that over the years, only construction has outstripped the tech sector in terms of growth, 91% growth in 15 years, employing well over 100,000 people now, and of course most of that action is in Vancouver. So the startup ecosystem, 15th in the world, according to a research house in San Francisco, but also #1 in Canada. Believe it or not, we are larger than the combination of Toronto and Waterloo in terms of a vibrant startup ecosystem. So we're really gaining a global reputation now as a city that attracts technology talent, attracts investment capital, and attracts tech companies to locate here. Even when we look at capital, you can see just in the last couple of years, investment capital into our startup community has really started to take off. $860 million last year. We think it's going to be well over $1 billion invested in our tech community in 2017. So what happens, of course, is when we get that kind of liquidity into the market, companies start to hire. That's one of the first things they'll do is look for talent, both globally and locally. And of course, there's so much activity on the recruiting front now that it's starting to outstrip supply. In fact, we're forecasting a roughly 30,000 person shortfall between now and 2021 if we don't start to change some policies and get more active in terms of promoting Vancouver globally and across Canada. So we took on last year a tech talent strategy. We worked really closely with all of our partners here in Vancouver and British Columbia, and engaged the entire tech community in what can we do to develop a more comprehensive, skills strategy, but talent strategy for the province to really feed into this huge appetite for recruiting here in Vancouver. We came up with 9 recommendations and 3 different themes. And those themes are recruitment, retention, and education. And, essentially what we're here to talk about today is under the recruitment theme, improving immigration policies and processes, much of what we've already seen with the federal government and the global talent stream. But we continue to advocate in Ottawa. We continue to work with people here in the province as well to support companies like yourself in making it easier to attract top talent from foreign markets. But you'll see a list of other things that we're also working on. So please reach out to us if you'd like to learn more, or just go to our website. In our talent section, you can learn more about what we're up to. And in particular, I'd like to highlight a program we're calling It's Your Move to Make, which is a global campaign to key markets in California as well as Northern Europe to really promote our tech sector to talent in those markets. So hopefully, what we'll be able to do over the next couple of years is reduce that gap and make it easier for companies like you to attract and retain top talent in Vancouver. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Craig. Oh, Ilya, I'm sorry. Back to Ilya.
No problem, Brian. Great. Very exciting. And Vancouver is definitely growing very quickly, and there's a lot to be done. So I'll just quickly talk about VanHack, and then I'll let Craig and Neil explain more about the Global Skills Visa, and then talk a little bit more about what we do at the end. Basically the idea and kind of what VanHack is it's a local tech company that is we started off as creating a virtual school for tech professionals that are interested in moving to Vancouver but don't have the soft skills. They don't know how to really present themselves, and maybe communication in English isn't quite there. So we started off by helping them with this. And we quickly realized that there was a lot of talent out there that was needing this, and then also a lot of talent there that didn't and was kind of ready to go and connect to companies. And so we've been doing that for the last couple of years, and have helped over 200 people get jobs, not only in Vancouver now, but across all of Canada. And I'm actually in Europe right now, so Europe as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how we're able to quickly bring talented and very diverse workforces talent to your teams at the end. But for now, let's go into the visa and kind of the nitty gritty of how it works with Craig and Neil from Ernst & Young. So please take it away, guys.
Thanks, Ilya. Just going to bring our slides up. Okay, is that showing now? Thanks, Ilya.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. See a lot of familiar faces online, so great to see them. And for those of you who are new, just thanks to Ilya and to Kathy for the time today to talk to you about what we think is pretty exciting, the Global Skills Strategy. Just a quick intro. Craig and Neil and I were part of the Canadian team in Vancouver for Ernst & Young, and we're very passionate about immigration, especially passionate in terms of supporting the tech industry. I think that's enough about us. So in terms of agenda, our topics are divided into the various pillars of the Global Skills Strategy, and we divided them based on which immigration agency employers deal with. So IRCC first, and then ESDC second. ESDC is the ministry and the facing part that employers deal with is called Service Canada. Just wanted to pause and take a moment about the history of global skills strategy. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I think we all need to take some pride in knowing that basically these pillars, a lot of the concepts came from strong advocacy from the community. As Brian mentioned, the local tech community here is very collegial, very tight, and I think that's a great community to be part of. So, as I recall that some of these concepts started to be chatted about 2 years ago. And so it's great to see that a lot of them are now crystallizing as part of the global skills strategy. Part of that, the change in the federal government, that really helped facilitate, it helped the immigration pendulum swing back to the facilitative side. It came back from the enforcement side of things. We've heard from the employer liaison officer that the culture within immigration in Canada has really changed, so that's great to hear. And like I said, the community, all parties involved, we're all working together to make it better for Vancouver and British Columbia. Just wanted to shout out to the various immigration-related agencies, because we think those ones that we deal with here in Vancouver and in British Columbia are the best in Canada. Hopefully we're not too biased, but so to start off, the Canada Border Services Agency, or CBSA, from our experience, the Vancouver airport is probably the best airport to deal with, probably the easiest to get challenging cases through. I know Neil diverts some people through Vancouver, even if they end up working in Alberta or even Toronto. The border crossings, we think they're the best in the country. Some in Ontario are starting to close down immigration on the weekends. So fortunately, British Columbia, they're not doing that. Service Canada, we think the team there is the most accessible Service Canada team in the country. In terms of Immigration Canada, this advent of the Employer Liaison Network has been fantastic. That came out probably about 2 years ago. We're sorry to see Cyan Upton is leaving in early August, but we hear from her that her successor is going to be great as well. And then lastly, with the provincial nominee program, I think it's really easy to say that the BC PNP is the best one in the country. Stark contrast to Alberta, which is not even doing express entry support yet. So when you look at those four agencies combined, we have a really, really great ecosystem in British Columbia. I'd like to turn it over to Neil now.
Thanks, Craig. So I'll get into the details of the global skills strategy now. So when we talk about global skills strategy, it's important to keep in mind, as Brian and Craig have mentioned, that the overall goal here is to facilitate Canadian employers attracting high-skilled foreign talent. And the way that the strategy achieves this is through what the government likes to call pillars. So there's 4 pillars. And the first pillar that I'm going to talk about is this 2-week service standard for certain work permit applications. So this 2-week service standard, it's the government has invested in a new processing center in Toronto, and this will largely benefit visa requiring applicants. So visa exempt applicants can still apply, as Craig had mentioned, at the airport and the borders, which are very facilitated in Vancouver. And in contrast, visa requiring applicants, such as Indian nationals and Chinese nationals, they have to apply through a visa office in order to get work authorization prior to coming to Canada. So for example, a visa requiring person in the US this past year would have submitted an application to the consulate in New York and be subject to 16 weeks of processing time. Under this new processing center, that's reduced to 2 weeks. So that's a huge step forward for visa requiring nationals. And we're very excited about it. We've already made use of this stream on quite a number of cases. In terms of how you qualify under the stream, your work permit application needs to fall under one of 2 broad categories. The first is an employer-specific LMIA exempt work permit. So a common example is an intra-company transfer. right? And the specific occupation that the person is coming to work in needs to be either at a managerial level. An example would be a software engineering manager, or at a professional level requiring university education. So most software engineers, developers, system analysts all fall under that category. Right, so the second broad category of work permits that is eligible for this stream is any LMIA supported work permit application where the LMIA is issued under the new global talent stream. And we'll talk about that stream shortly. So LMIA stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment, which is the labor market testing process in Canada. So the 2-week service standard includes accompanying family members applying at the same time. So one benefit to keep in mind with Canadian immigration is that in most cases, spouses are eligible for an open work permit valid for the same duration as the principal applicant. So what this means is the spouse can work anywhere in Canada for any employer. And in many countries, that's not an option. So this is a benefit of applying, especially if you have family to come to Canada. And likewise, dependent minor children are also eligible for study permits and visitor status. So some limitations to keep in mind when we're applying under the 2-week service stream. The stream is intended for applicants outside of Canada. So the goal here is to facilitate entry of foreign talent into Canada. And once in Canada, there are other avenues available to extend your status here. The application process is all online. So the intake process to get into the stream is all automated, and therefore you should not be mailing in your application in person or through a visa application center. And the last point here is if the government's committing to expedited processing, in return they're expecting your application to be complete upfront. So we've just included some tips here, some common points that are often missed when submitting an application. If you're doing the application on your own, my advice is read the document checklist online carefully for both the country of residence and the country of nationality of the foreign national. All right, so we talked about the first pillar of global skills strategy. First of 4. Second pillar, which is equally as exciting, is the short-term work permit exemption. So this is an exemption to facilitate work in Canada for up to 15 consecutive days or 30 consecutive days. And the goal of this exemption is to facilitate short-term intercompany work exchanges and the entrance of temporary expertise by allowing admissions at the ports of entry without a work permit. So this exemption is hugely beneficial for Canadian employers in certain scenarios. For example, employers previously hiring foreign skilled consultants to work on a short-term project, even if it was just a few days, were often required to support a work permit or labor market impact assessment in advance of the consultant coming to Canada. So the lead-up process for supporting entry of these short-term consultants was often quite stressful, given the costs involved and the uncertainties with the work permit process. So now these consultants just need to demonstrate to border officials that they satisfy the work permit exemption criteria. There's no need for a formal application to be made upon entry. And so in terms of specific requirements for the exemption, similar to the last pillar we talked about, the focus of this exemption is on managerial level positions or professional occupations requiring university education. And once the exemption has been used, there is an allotted wait time before you can reuse the exemption. So this is not intended to be used repeatedly over the course of a year. So there's a 6-month wait time for the 15-day exemption and a 12-month wait time for the 30-day exemption. So the exemption it doesn't allow intermittent entries to Canada unless the wait time is passed. But keep in mind that the exemption does not replace existing business visitor or work permit categories. So this exemption is a new immigration benefit that complements these other benefits. If re-entry or extension of stay is required before the wait time is passed, the applicant will need to make use of a second exemption, a different work permit exemption like the business visitor category, or apply for a work permit. And some quick last tips before we move on. If you're thinking about using this exemption and you've identified a foreign national coming into Canada, the first step is just to ask them whether they've used this exemption before, and if yes, has the allotted wait time passed. Assuming that they're eligible, the next step is for the Canadian host or the foreign source organization to provide a one-page support letter, just outlining the skilled work being done in Canada and confirming the short duration of stay here. Right? So in most cases, entry is facilitated by a frontline customs officer. You present them the letter, they just usher you into the country. If the foreign worker needs to be on Canadian payroll, then the worker should request a formal status document called a visitor record. And this request is processed at the secondary immigration office at the airport or the land border. And this visitor record facilitates government applications, for example, a social insurance number and other applications as needed. So just keep that in mind as a practical point. And on that note, I've talked about 2 pillars. I'm going to turn it over to Craig to talk about the third of the 4 pillars, which is the dedicated service channel.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to mention a tip on this one that came out of a presentation yesterday. We've heard that some officers back east are pretty gung-ho about this short-term work permit exemption. And so they've been codifying business visitors under this, which is not necessarily in the benefit of that particular foreign worker. So as employers, I think it would be, a tip for you would be, if you have these people coming through and you want them to use this exemption, explain to them that this is distinct from a business visitor and that they should be asking for this specific exemption rather than as a business visitor. Alternatively, if you want them to come in as a business visitor, tell them that they don't want to use this exemption because it is so restrictive in terms of the time frame. So it's good to educate your traveler which category exactly you want them to apply under.
Great. Maybe we should ask Ilya if there's any questions to be answered, or are you okay with us moving on?
Yeah, you can ask them, everyone as well. Any questions, guys and ladies and gentlemen here? We have one actually here from Natalie. She asked, for not code 2147 computer engineer, if a candidate has 10 years of professional experience but has not completed their degree, do they still meet the requirements? The information online around this point states a degree or 5 years of experience is required. So if they have over 5 years of experience but they don't have a degree, can they still do, or can they still get the global skills visa? Great question.
That is a good question. So under this short-term work permit exemption, you do not need to present a degree, so long as you are working in the occupation and the duration is limited. First pillar I talked about, 2-week service standard. Again, in most cases, you do not need to present a degree, so long as your occupation falls under a NOC level A. And so 2147 does fall under NOC level A, which is a professional occupation requiring a university education in most cases. But that doesn't necessarily mean you got to present the degree in order to qualify. And Craig can get into the details maybe on the LMIA side.
Okay, sure thing. Okay. We're going to talk about the dedicated service channels. So when the Global Skills Strategy came out on June 12th, one of the things that was really exciting employers was this notion of receiving concierge service from Immigration Canada and ESDC. And so basically what that means is both of these agencies have crewed up teams of account managers, so they're distinct. So if the ESDC team is distinct from the Immigration Canada team. I think they're both located in Ottawa. And so if a company has been is eligible for the channel, then they're supposed to receive concierge service, which means that if a case is taking a bit longer than you expected, you can ask the account manager to follow up on it. If something is a bit complex about that case, perhaps it's best for the employer to let the account manager know that, so that it can be scrutinized a bit more carefully, perhaps by a more senior good officer. One thing we did want to stress, though, is that some employers have been under the impression that what this means if you're in the channel is you somehow can submit simplified applications, and that's not necessarily true. You still have to demonstrate that your applicant meets the requirements for whatever category you're choosing, and then you need to provide a complete application. Another thing that's been indicated on, at least I think it's Immigration Canada's website, is it says that they're not necessarily going to expedite all cases. So, so if they're eligible for the 2 weeks that Neil had mentioned, I think by and large they're going to be processed in that 2 weeks, but they're not all going to be processed even faster than that. In terms of how an employer gets referred into the channel, you have to do it through a designated referral partner. And so the one that I want to speak about to the most today is obviously the Vancouver Economic Commission. And so what has happened is before June 12th, Immigration Canada and the ESTC, they reached out, they decided, they knew that agencies can figure out which ones are the great employers, which ones are expanding, which new ones want to come to Canada. So they reached out to these different associations and other government agencies and said, could you do the due diligence process for us? You're much better at doing that than we are. And then if you refer a company, then we can take comfort knowing that pre-assessment has been conducted, and then they will assess and decide whether an employer will be in part of the channel. So in terms of the Vancouver Economic Commission, the go-to person here is Courtney Crichton, spelled just like Michael Crichton, so it's C-R-I-C-H-T-O-N. Her email address is ccrichton at
VancouverEconomic.com.
VancouverEconomic.com. Thanks, Brian. And so if an employer is interested, we encourage you to reach out to Courtney. We'll go through the criteria in a moment, the information that Courtney will need. But I would be remiss not to mention a couple others. So if you're an employer and you already have a pre-existing great relationship with the trade commissioner, for instance, in San Francisco or in Seattle, or perhaps in another country, that trade commissioner can also refer you into the channel. And also the BC Tech Association, they have quite a rigorous questionnaire online that you can access at that link. And that kind of shows you in kind of a more granular level what kind of information these referral partners need. Okay, so as Neil has mentioned, a lot of the global skills strategy is very tech focused, and it's even more pronounced in this part of these criteria for being referred. So the first one is a real focus on what's called an innovative company. And so if you look at the second bullet, there's two that are very tech focused. So there's one, whether the company has R&D capacity, and the second one is whether you're commercializing your IP in Canada. The first one is a bit broader. Does the company have an innovative business model? So that one perhaps provides a bit more room for companies that maybe aren't so tech focused, but still want to be part of the channel. In terms of that third criteria down there, there's a focus on either new companies or existing companies that are going to embark on an expansion program. And I see that Erica Young at Event Base is on the line. We were in a meeting where we were told by ESTC that it was going to be just for new companies coming to Canada. And we said, well, how about the great companies that are already here and want to expand? So it's great to see that they've adopted that recommendation into these criteria. The fourth one, so these are different factors that can be used to show that the company does have the ability and capacity to scale up, which means you're going to either be new or you're going to grow. So encourage all of you to take a look at those. So, reflect on those, try to address these by writing just some answers in Word, and then I encourage you to forward them to Courtney or to another agency. I know there was one question about whether, if you're not so tech oriented, does that mean that you're not eligible under one of these streams? And that's not necessarily the intent. I mean, if you can fit under that innovative business plan, then arguably you can still qualify. What this slide is addressing is the immigration agencies don't want employers to apply into the channel too early. So if you don't have a need for a foreign worker within the next 6 months or so, then what they're saying is they would like you to just hold off until you do have a foreign worker case on the horizon. Okay, so I need to backtrack a bit. So that set of criteria that we just went through, if you as an employer meet those, then you will be referred. So for instance, we'll take the VC situation. If you contact Courtney and you give her that information and she refers you, she's going to refer your company to Immigration Canada. And then because you met those specific criteria for innovation, Immigration Canada in turn will refer your company to ESDC. So you will hopefully be admitted into both channels. Now this slide is a different set of criteria, a little bit watered down. And for these ones, if you as an employer do not meet those innovation criteria, but you meet the ones on this screen, you will only be referred to Immigration Canada. You will not be referred to ESDC. So my suggestion to you is to look at the innovation criteria first, and only if you don't meet those, then consider these ones. Okay, really quickly, in terms of the third pillar that Neil mentioned, there's two types of LMIA categories. They're very creatively called categories A and category B. And so the advantages of these, by and large, is that the Canadian recruitment is pretty much watered down to the point that it's not really a factor that will make or break your application. So you don't have to advertise for the 4 weeks by publicizing your wage range and keeping your fingers crossed that you can demonstrate that there are no qualified Canadians. So, when you have that service candidate interview, the officer is not going to grill you about the recruitment that you conducted. So obviously that's a huge advantage, but then the second advantage is that once you get your LMIA is supposed to be processed within 10 business days. It's probably safer to think of it between 10 and 20. And then once you do receive your LMIA, your work permit, as Neil mentioned, will qualify for the 2-week service standard. But again, we just want to stress that you do have to make complete applications. Don't take shortcuts. Otherwise, you're at risk of having, for instance, your LMIA application rejected. So just really quickly, so this category A, so this one requires you as an employer to be referred into the channel. And how this came about was through roundtable discussions. Companies were saying, sometimes we need to expand, we need a unicorn, we need a really super qualified person to lead up a team, and then we're going to build up a team of Canadians around that person. So what ESDC came up is this one for highly specialized global talent. And so the expectation is a company is not going to submit a ton of these type. These are for those exceptional cases. So again, recruitment is waived. However, in turn, the criteria that they've set is they want to see that this person either has exceptional knowledge of your industry, or their education is exceptional, it's very specialized to the position that you need them for, or they have a good amount of years of experience, so they're not freshly out of university. And then lastly, they've set a wage floor of $80,000. If the particular occupation has a median wage even higher than that, then that's the wage that governs, but they have set a floor of $80,000. Okay, so Neil's going to talk about category B.
Thanks, Craig. So we're on the last pillar right now, and I'll try and keep it short because I think we're at 40 minutes in. So So last pillar, so category A of global talent. So taking a step back, global talent falls under the responsibility of ESDC as opposed to IRCC. So this is Employment, Social Development Canada or Service Canada. Right? Craig talked about category A, limited to companies referred through the dedicated service channel. I'm talking about category B, and this is a category that's pretty exciting because it's open to any Canadian employer in any industry, so long as the position on the application is listed on ESDC's labor market shortage list. And as you can see, that list just happens to be all tech-focused occupations for now. So it's really good for the tech industry. And there's 10 occupations on there. You see there's one managerial one, there's 8 professional occupations, a software engineer, developers, systems analysts, all those. And there's one technical occupation, which is digital media and design. So this is a really exciting development. So in my world, back in 2012, the digital media industry, so visual effects, animation, gaming, had a recruitment exempt LMIA process introduced, and that was a huge contributor to the industry booming in BC and in Ontario. But the tech industry didn't have a similar recruitment exemption, so there are some lobbying efforts made with the government. And once the government realized how burdensome immigration was for tech, they decided to implement a global skills strategy and this global talent category B. So this is an exciting development for tech, and if it goes the same way digital media went, we're excited for how things will turn out. So, and just a reminder, I mean, we're talking about global skills strategy and global talent and how facilitative these categories are, but there are also other categories outside of GSS that are even more facilitative and easier, so don't forget about those categories. NAFTA professional, intra-company transfer. And when you are filing LMIAs, even if they're under global talent, there are still minimum criteria that need to be met, and one critical piece is the prevailing wage needs to be met. So I've listed a number of wages here in Vancouver just to give you an idea, and they're all in the $70,000 to $80,000 range annually. So if your prevailing wage is not met, you'll have to look at other categories to facilitate the work permit.
Sorry, it's not on the slide, but can you give some tips on the labor market benefit plan?
Sure. So as part of the LMIA process under global talent, the employer needs to submit what's called the labor market benefits plan. So if you've done an LMIA before, this is kind of similar to the transition plan of an LMIA. So benefits plan, you're essentially outlining a plan to Service Canada on how you're going to increase either investment in the Canadian company, recruit or retain Canadians. I think my main point there is the new Service Canada people in global talent, they're learning about tech. They're not experts. So it's a bit of an education process. But from what we've seen, they're very facilitative. And usually they get the plan negotiated in about a week. And when you negotiate the plan, it's important to keep in mind not to kind of overcommit to things, overcommit to recruiting Canadians or retaining them if you can't actually deliver on it. So just something to keep in mind when you're negotiating. Try and meet the minimum criteria and let Service Canada come back with feedback. But usually they're being facilitative. And it seems like they're all pretty nice officers over there. I haven't had any issues yet. So
yeah, I guess the downside to global skills strategy is, unfortunately, it's not the Vancouver office that's processing these cases. As you'll see when you look at the instruction guide, the cases go to Montreal or somewhere in Quebec. So unfortunately, it's not Vancouver. Sorry, one of the things I just wanted to mention is, as employers, you might be wondering, okay, so I'm going to make promises to transfer skills and knowledge to the Canadian workers from the foreign worker. What happens if these things don't actually materialize? So what ESDC has said is that basically they're not trying to be too heavy-handed. So if a company doesn't meet their commitments, then perhaps that employer won't be allowed to use this category in the future. However, kind of wearing my kind of lawyer hat, I'm a bit leery because there's been one immigration law that's been sitting dormant for a few years, and what it says is if it was a condition of the LMIA that skills transfer was a condition, and the employer doesn't meet it, then all of a sudden it's one of the grounds for violation under employer compliance. And one of the things, I have to be careful what I say, but we're aware of a case right now where a company bumped up the wages on a couple LMIAs, and they're being threatened to be sued by ESDC in the tune of $200,000 plus, and being banned from the temporary foreign worker program for 10 years. So with that dormant law there that could be used for this kind of purpose, kind of scared that that could be enacted at some point by ESDC. So that's just another cautionary reason not to overcommit. And whatever things you do commit, you do have to make your best efforts to implement it.
I think this is our last slide. Kind of just further to my other point about there being other facilitative categories in Canada outside a global skills strategy. And some of these categories are hugely beneficial to certain categories of applicants. So for example, there's, as I mentioned, there's spouses and children. There's francophone, which is a category that facilitates French nationals or French speaking nationals working in Canada. So a lot of these categories don't even need employer support, and none of these categories require an LMIA. So if any of these categories are applicable, we'd still, in most cases, recommend using these categories over global skills strategy. And there's one category in particular I know Craig gets excited about. It's the reciprocal employment category. So I won't steal his thunder. I'll just let him talk about that one.
Okay, I'll be really fast. So before the introduction of global skills strategy, of course, we all wanted to avoid an LMIA. So the category that we were really starting to promote with tech companies is reciprocal employment. I guess the starting point is you have to be a multinational company, so you have to have a foreign office. And so the second criterion is, do any of your Canadian workers hold a foreign work permit? And so if they have and they're working for one of the foreign offices intermittently or full-time, then under the policies, you should be able to bring in foreign workers up to, even up to like 9 foreign workers per 1 Canadian. We don't actually use that that difference in ratio. Sometimes we do 5 versus 1, but and then I guess one cautionary point is Immigration Canada seems to be narrowing this a little bit to say that the person actually has to be, the foreign worker has to be hired by the foreign operations first. So a strategy that might work is if you have somebody and they happen to be in the same country that your foreign office is from, hire them by the foreign office, for like a month, and then use this category to transfer them over to Canada. Global mobility policy is always recommended. And my last point is with this, it's very much based on, do you have any Canadians with foreign work permits? So there isn't a lot of scrutiny over the Canadian role or the qualifications of the particular foreign worker. So if you haven't used this category before, certainly reach out to us and we're happy to chat to you about whether that's feasible for you. Okay, thanks, Ilya. Turn it back to you.
Awesome, very cool, Craig. I didn't know about that last one. It sounds exciting. And thank you as well, Neil. Very, very, very good information. Very exciting times to be in the I guess HR space in Canada with these new changes. Before I kind of chat quickly about VanHack and we wrap things up with Q&A, we did have a question here from Teresa that I think is a great question. She asked if you use a short-term work permit exemption to kind of try before you buy. Does that negatively affect the 2-week work permit for category A and B? So could they bring someone in for a few days or a couple of weeks to see how that works and then go into the kind of 2-week visa? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. So, so keep in mind the usual exemption occurs at the port of entry. So this would be a visa exempt national, and in most cases for visa exempt nationals applying for a work permit, we just say apply for your work permit at the port of entry too. If this is a visa requiring national, they would have to request the exemption through a visa office. That's my understanding. So in that scenario, it might make sense in most cases just to apply straight away for the work permit. It's going to take the same amount of time anyway, so why apply twice? But to answer the actual question, no, it doesn't. If you did use the exemption, it doesn't then prohibit you from using the 2-week stream.
Well, I guess logistically that, because there was a point on Neil's slide that said the person has to be outside of Canada at the time of application for the work permit. I guess that person would have to leave Canada. They can't just stay here while that second work permit application is in process. So that's just logistically.
Nice. That's good to keep in mind. And also, just would they have to be your employee already when they're on the short-term work permit, right? Like you have to have them on your payroll and they have to be employed. They can't just come for 2 weeks, maybe as a contractor. How would that work?
Yeah, they can come. They don't have to be on payroll. There's no requirement to be on payroll.
That's good.
Often, I'd say in most cases, it's a contractor.
Okay, perfect. Great. So I think that makes things a little bit easier. Great question. I just want to be cautious of time. I was going to go through a little bit more information about VanHack and kind of what we're about. But I know that people are kind of giving up their lunch hour to go through this. So I won't go through the whole presentation. I'll just quickly say that we have a talent pool of about 100,000 technical professionals, mostly senior software engineers that are interested in relocating to Vancouver. And if you'd like to talk to any of them, just reach out to me, ilya@vanhack.com. You should all have my emails by now, and I'll also touch base with you after the webinar too. And we work with many different companies across Canada and the world. Accenture, Booking.com, Volkswagen, some notable big names, and companies like Thinkific, My Best Helper, Traction on Demand, Pick-a-Tick. And one thing I'll kind of say just last before going questions is that we're really big on diversity. For example, we helped Pick-a-Tick hire a female full-stack engineer with over 5 years experience just last week. And about 15% of our talent pool are female engineers. So that's something that, because we look all over the world, we're able to find really high-level, talented, and diverse talent. So with that, I'll just quickly say, we have 5 minutes, and of course, if you want to stay longer, that's fine too for a Q&A. So I saw some questions here on the chat, one from Cam, so I'll ask that one. And if anyone else has a question, you could also just unmute yourself and ask the question, or just ask a question in the chat. So Cam asks, for the regular LMIA category, where do we need to advertise? For the regular LMI category, where we need to advertise, what is the minimum high wage rate for BC? So are there, that's a good question. Is that clear?
Sorry, what occupation are you referring to, Cam?
So, yeah, that's a good question. So she refers to NOC code 5241, graphic designer.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and you're referring to the regular LMIA process as opposed to the LMIA process under the global talent stream. So,
yes.
The regular LMIA process requires advertising on 3 medium. So if the position is posted for Vancouver, that would be Work BC is one, and then 2 additional locations. So most employers choose online advertising is the way to go. So for example, creative head or something like that, something that would be used in the industry to recruit for that role. And in terms of the minimum wage requirement in BC, I believe that one's $22 an hour in Vancouver. 22.60, 22.60, somewhere around there.
Do you want to talk about the transition to August 28th?
Sure. So yeah, if your question is within kind of the digital media realm, so some of you might know, with introduction of global skills strategy, the digital media LMIA for NOC 5241 and 2173 was eliminated. But that being said, there's been some follow-up discussion between industry and the government has now agreed to a August 28th transition period. So if you're in digital media and you're relying on that, you can still submit applications until August 28th. I hope that answers the question.
Cool. Thanks, Neil. And Cam says thank you as well. Great. So any other questions about the new Global Skills Strategy Visa? The clear, basically, if anyone was working with those NOC codes that we mentioned earlier, basically 2 to 4 weeks of processing time, and they'll be able to be in the office working with you. So that greatly changes. It's really day and night for how things used to be. So very, very exciting.
Hey, Ilya, can I make one last comment?
Please.
Okay, so that global talent occupation list of 10 occupations, that was very much driven by the BC community here, and you know, they were lobbying for 8, and not all of them got on there. So the point I want to make is ESDC is going to assess whether those occupations are being used. So our suggestion for employers is, if you're going to use category B, keep track of how many cases you do. And then, for instance, if we reach out in a year from now, asking the community if they've used it, so that we can go back, you know, Kathy can go back to ESDC, that would be helpful if the data was at our fingertips. And also, there is the opportunity to still advocate for additional occupations to be added on that list. So if you're finding that you do have 1 or 2 occupations not on that list, yeah, like please let VC know, or BC Tech Association, you know, somebody, so that we can collectively try to get those occupations added.
It's a great point. Great. If there's anyone who's missing, then we should, get as many there as possible. So David asked a great question about the labor market benefits plan. So do we need to build multiple labor benefit plans if we hire for multiple roles, or will one suffice and will be blanket?
Yeah, we just did this. We submitted 3 applications. So the nice thing is it's just one plan. And then what's even nicer is, if the same employer submits further applications down the road, that one original plan still applies, and with the expectation that ESDC might ask for an update on how implementation of that plan is going. We don't know whether the plan will be good indefinitely. Like, there might be some point, I think the time frame of 18 months was thrown around, so maybe a plan will be good for 18 months. But so a lot of heavy lifting at the front end to do the first plan, and then thankfully you don't have to do that for every subsequent application.
That's great. Great news. Makes things a lot easier. And for that, is it just in the form that you fill out, where you have to put it in a section, I think 8 and 9 in the form? That's where you do the labor benefit plan. So you just have to do that once.
Exactly. And then section 10 asks you whether you've submitted a plan before, and if you tick off yes, then you go from there.
Perfect. How extensive does that plan need to be? Have to fill out the whole form, or is there kind of a middle ground, or what have you seen works?
I mean, we haven't done too many, but we've been able to fit all the content right into the form itself. Initially, we thought we were going to have to supplement it with Word documents, but there's about 5 or 6 lines per activity. So far that's been enough. But having said that, yeah, I mean, if you're an employer and you want to provide more detail, then please go ahead and do it on a Word document, and then just add that to your form.
Great. That sounds a lot better than how it used to be, where you have to say every single candidate from Canada, why didn't you hire them, and all the other stuff. So much better. Great. Any other questions? Does anyone have would like to ask a voice question? Okay. Everyone is shy, I guess. No problem. All right. So I know we're a couple minutes over here, so I just want to thank the Vancouver Economic Commission again. Thank you very much, Brian, for sharing and supporting the community so much. Craig, Neil, you guys are the experts, so thank you so much for going through all the details, and it's definitely very exciting. And I guess also thank you to Kathy for helping to set this up as well. Vivian just asked a questions, will the PowerPoints be shared? And yes, they will. So we can share those out either probably a little bit later today, or if not tomorrow. So I'll just share all three PowerPoints, Brian's, Neil's, and ours. Although you guys didn't see ours, you can see it later, which is fine. Yeah, so that way everyone has all the information and can kind of refer. And of course, this video, as I mentioned in the beginning, is being recorded. It will go onto the VanHack YouTube channel as well as our blog. So I'll share that out so people can, for future reference, just go back and watch and kind of see if there's anything you want to revisit. Yeah, so once again, thank you everyone for spending your lunch hour with us. Hopefully you learned a lot, and you can bring some great tech talent to Vancouver and help grow the economy even more. And thanks again to Vancouver Economic Commission and Ernst & Young for being here with us. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks again, everyone. Cheers.